jet touched down an hour earlier than scheduled, its silver wings cutting through the dawn as Alexander Kane stepped onto the tarmac. He was a man the world knew as ruthless and untouchable, a billionaire who built empires with the flick of a pen and destroyed rivals with a single phone call. Yet on that morning, he was just a weary man craving the quiet of his own home, the scent of polished wood, the view of the gardens his late mother once tended. He dismissed his driver, choosing to take the wheel himself, the thought of surprising his household warming him in a way prophets never could. But as his mansion's tall gates swung open and the gravel crunched under his tires, he felt a strange unease ripple through his chest, as though fate itself had hurried him home for a reason. The estate loomed in silence, but not the comfortable kind. Lights flickered faintly in rooms where they should not have been. Curtains twitched when no breeze stirred. Alexander parked quietly and entered through the side door, his polished shoes echoing against marble floors. Something was off. The air smelled of smoke and perfume, heavy, cloying, unfamiliar. His brow furrowed as he moved through the hall, the house that had always greeted him with calm, now whispering with secrets. He passed portraits of ancestors glaring down in disapproval, their painted eyes seeming to follow him as he followed the faint murmur of voices drifting from the grand salon. What he saw froze him in place. There, in the golden glow of chandeliers, his wife Cassandra laughed, her body curled close around a stranger's, champagne glasses clinking as their hands lingered far too long. They hadn't heard him enter. They thought the master of the house was continents away closing deals. The sight struck Alexander not with rage at first, but with a hollow ache that spread through his chest like ice water. He had given her everything, mansions, jewels, the world at her fingertips, and yet here she was, trading his trust for cheap thrill. His hands clenched, but he didn't storm in. Instead, he retreated a step, his mind swirling, his heart pounding with the choice that stood before him. He thought of the years he had spent building a kingdom, the late nights, the sacrifices, the way Cassandra had smiled in photographs beside him as though she were his partner in all things. But behind those smiles, had there always been lies? He pressed himself into the shadows, watching her tilt her head back in laughter, her hand brushing the stranger's jaw in a gesture she had once reserved for him alone. Fury finally boiled in his veins, but beneath it, something worse, clarity. Money could buy loyalty in business, but never in love. And perhaps he had blinded himself to this truth until it stood before him, cruel and undeniable. Before he could step forward, however, movement at the edge of the room caught his eye. A young maid, new, shy, barely noticed among the household staff, was standing frozen near the doorway, a tray in her trembling hands. Her wide eyes darted from Cassandra to Alexander hidden in the shadows. She had seen everything, and worse, she had seen him watching. Their eyes locked for a moment, and the billionaire realized she too bore the weight of a secret that could shatter everything. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated, lowering her gaze quickly, as though ashamed to even witness his humiliation. Alexander retreated to the hall, his footsteps soundless, his mind a storm. He could confront Cassandra now, explode with the rage of betrayal, but something in the maid's silence unsettled him. Why had she not spoken? Why had she looked at him not with pity or judgment, but with something else? Sorrow, perhaps even solidarity. For a man who trusted no one, the look in her eyes unsettled him more than the betrayal unfolding in the salon. He found himself lingering near the servants' wing, waiting, needing to know what she might say if given the chance. Minutes later, she came quietly, setting the tray down on a side table, her hands still trembling. She nearly jumped when she saw him standing there, his imposing figure cloaked in shadow. "Sir," she stammered, lowering her eyes. "I didn't know you had returned." Alexander studied her carefully, his voice low but steady. "You saw everything." Her throat bobbed as she nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Yes, sir." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, almost in a whisper, she added, "I am sorry you had to see that. You deserve better." Her words struck him harder than Cassandra's betrayal. No one spoke to Alexander Kane that way. Not board members, not rivals, not even friends. But this maid, with her simple honesty, cut through his armor with ease. He narrowed his eyes. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena," she murmured, twisting her fingers nervously. "Elena Brooks." He repeated it slowly, committing it to memory, the sound of it oddly grounding in the chaos that threatened to consume him. For the first time in years, he felt the walls of his empire crack, and it wasn't because of betrayal, but because of an unexpected truth from someone he had never noticed before. That night, Alexander did not confront Cassandra. Instead, he retreated to his private study, pouring himself a glass of bourbon he barely touched. He stared at the fire until dawn, Elena's voice replaying in his mind, "You deserve better." Such simple words, yet they unraveled him. He wondered how long she had been in his house, how many times he had passed her without seeing her. And he wondered why, in the darkest moment of his marriage, it was her voice and not Cassandra's laughter that echoed in his chest. He knew only one thing with certainty. His life, his marriage, his empire would never be the same again. And as the sun rose over the sprawling estate, Alexander made a silent vow. He would not act in fury, nor let betrayal dictate his next move. He would watch, wait, and uncover the full truth of the woman who shared his name, but not his loyalty. Yet he also knew he could not ignore the quiet maid who had shown him the smallest act of humanity in a house filled with deceit. For a billionaire who trusted no one, this was the most dangerous revelation of all, that perhaps trust, and even love, could bloom in the most unexpected of places. The following days were a silent performance inside the mansion. Cassandra moved about as though nothing was amiss, her laughter echoing in phone calls, her perfume lingering in the corridors. But Alexander had changed. He left for the office each morning as usual, only to return at unexpected hours, sometimes catching fragments of whispered conversations, sometimes finding the lingering scent of cigars that he never smoked. Cassandra believed him oblivious, but in truth, he was watching her with the cold precision of a hunter circling prey. Every lie she told, every glance she exchanged with strangers in his home, he stored carefully, building a case that would one day bring her world crashing down. Elena, meanwhile, did her best to keep invisible. She cleaned, served, and disappeared into the shadows, terrified that her moment of truth with Alexander might cost her job, or worse. Yet she could not help noticing the change in him. He was no longer the untouchable master of the house. He looked human, burdened, and every time their eyes met by accident across the dining room or in the corridor, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, perhaps, or the acknowledgement of shared knowledge, a secret that bound them closer than words could. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Alexander found himself in the library, the fire crackling while he stared at untouched papers. His mind was elsewhere, heavy with betrayal. Elena entered quietly, placing a tray of tea on the side table. She tried to retreat unnoticed, but his voice stopped her. "Why do you stay in this house?" he asked suddenly, his gaze fixed on the flames. She froze, unsure if it was a trap. "Because I need the work, sir," she whispered, "and because leaving would not change the truth you carry." Her courage startled him. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, he noticed the strength in her eyes, the quiet dignity she carried despite her humble role. That night, he asked her more questions about her family, her past, her dreams. She answered cautiously, speaking of hardships and sacrifices, of a mother she supported with her wages, of a life she never complained about. And when she finally left, Alexander sat alone, shaken by how her honesty felt more valuable than all the wealth he possessed. Cassandra's diamonds glittered like lies, but Elena's simple words shone brighter than truth itself. Days turned into weeks, and the dual life of the mansion intensified. Cassandra continued her charade, even daring to parade new gowns and jewels Alexander had not bought her, while Elena carried on with her work, careful yet unable to ignore the magnetic pull of the man who watched her with growing curiosity. Alexander was no fool. He had investigators quietly follow Cassandra, gathering evidence of her betrayal. But while betrayal confirmed itself in photographs and reports, something else grew quietly in his heart, something he had not expected: admiration for the maid who had become his silent confidant. The climax came one afternoon when Alexander returned home earlier than ever. He walked into the garden only to find Cassandra laughing with the same stranger he had once caught her with, their hands entwined as though the estate belonged to them. Rage surged through him, but before he could step forward, Elena appeared from the terrace, carrying a tray of flowers she had been arranging for the dining hall. Her eyes widened in horror at the scene, but unlike before, she didn't freeze. She looked directly at Alexander, her gaze urging him to finally act, to end the performance once and for all. In that instant, something inside him snapped, not with blind fury, but with cold, deliberate resolve. He strode forward, his voice echoing like thunder across the garden. Cassandra paled, stumbling back as she realized the game was over. The stranger tried to stammer an excuse, but Alexander silenced him with a look so sharp it cut the air itself. "Get out," he said, his tone final, his authority absolute. The man fled without another word, leaving Cassandra trembling in the garden she once ruled. But what shocked everyone was what Alexander did next. He didn't scream, didn't raise his hand, didn't hurl accusations. Instead, he turned to Elena, who stood frozen with her tray of flowers, and said softly, "Leave that. Come inside with me." The gesture, small yet monumental, sent a ripple through the entire household. Servants whispered in awe, Cassandra's face drained of color, and Elena herself could hardly believe what she had heard. Yet she obeyed, following him inside, leaving Cassandra standing abandoned in the storm of her own lies. Inside the mansion, Alexander finally let the weight of betrayal fall. He told Elena everything, that he had known for weeks, that he had gathered evidence, that he would end his marriage not with scandal, but with dignity. And through it all, she listened quietly, her hands folded, her gaze steady. When he finished, silence hung heavy in the grand hall. Then Elena, in her soft, trembling voice, said words that would stay with him forever. "Sometimes losing what poisons you is the only way to heal." For the first time in years, Alexander Kane, the billionaire feared by boardrooms and envied by rivals, felt his throat tighten. His chest ached not with rage, but with something dangerously close to hope. He had returned home early and discovered betrayal, yes, but he had also uncovered something far more unexpected. The possibility that loyalty, honesty, and perhaps even love could be found not in the glitter of chandeliers, but in the quiet strength of the maid who refused to look away when his world fell apart. The divorce proceedings began with a silence that unsettled Cassandra more than shouting ever could. Alexander did not rant or beg for explanations. He simply presented evidence, photographs, bank transfers, and records of her deceit. Lawyers trembled as he laid out a case so watertight it left Cassandra no room for defense. Yet what truly broke her was not the loss of money or status. It was the way Alexander no longer looked at her. He regarded her not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a stranger unworthy of his time. For a woman who had thrived on his attention, even in anger, that indifference was her ultimate punishment. News of the separation spread quickly, rippling through high society. Whispers filled gala halls and charity events. The billionaire's wife had been caught. The mighty Kane was free again. Speculation ran wild about who would become the next woman in his life, but none dared to guess the truth, that the one who now held his trust was not a socialite or heiress, but a maid with calloused hands and gentle eyes. Elena tried to keep her head down as gossip swirled. But the more Alexander included her in quiet moments, the harder it became to remain unseen. One evening, he invited her into his study, not as a servant, but as a guest. He poured her tea with his own hands, a gesture so shocking she nearly refused. "I don't belong here," she whispered, trembling. Alexander's gaze softened in a way few had ever seen. "Elena, you are the only one who has spoken truth to me when everyone else fed me lies. If anyone belongs here, it is you." Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hide, for she knew the risk of believing in such words, yet her heart ached at their sincerity. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened, not with grand gestures, but with small, quiet moments. Alexander asked about her mother's health, and when he learned she struggled with medical bills, he had them paid anonymously, leaving Elena stunned. She noticed he began spending less time in glittering clubs and more evenings walking the gardens where she worked, often pausing to ask her thoughts on the simplest things, the weather, the flowers, even the meaning of happiness. For a man who once measured life in profit margins, these questions revealed a transformation she could hardly believe. Cassandra, however, refused to fade quietly. She stormed society gatherings, weaving lies of betrayal on Alexander's part, trying to paint herself as a victim. But her words rang hollow, for everyone knew the truth. Her desperation grew, and one night, in a drunken rage, she returned to the mansion uninvited. She screamed in the courtyard, demanding to be let in, calling Elena names so vile the staff shuddered. Alexander himself stepped out, calm but unyielding. "You have no place here anymore," he said, his voice like iron. And when Cassandra lunged at Elena, it was Alexander who shielded her, his arm protectively around the maid, declaring before witnesses what many had only whispered, "She is under my protection." That moment shattered every remaining illusion Cassandra clung to. She left in disgrace, her power stripped, her pride in ruins. And though Elena trembled in shock, Alexander's steady presence beside her gave her courage. For the first time, she realized he was not simply a man of wealth and command. He was a man willing to risk reputation for the truth of his heart. It terrified her as much as it moved her. The city's elite buzzed with scandal. How could the mighty Kane choose a maid over diamonds and pedigrees? Some sneered, predicting Elena would be discarded in weeks. Others whispered that perhaps this was what true power looked like, the ability to defy society's judgment and follow one's own path. Elena avoided such talk, but she could not avoid the new warmth in Alexander's eyes, the way his voice softened when speaking her name. She felt both cherished and burdened, for she knew stepping into his world could destroy her. Yet her heart already betrayed her resolve. One night, under the quiet shimmer of stars, Alexander found her in the garden. "Do you regret being the one who saw me that night?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated, her hands clasped tightly. "Sometimes," she admitted honestly, "because it changed everything. And because I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand where you are pulling me." He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Elena, you don't need to be strong alone. You only need to be honest. That is what saved me." His words broke something inside her. Walls built from years of hardship crumbled, and for once she allowed herself to cry freely. In that moment, beneath the stars, their fates intertwined irrevocably. The billionaire who had once believed power was everything, now found himself humbled by love, and the maid who had once thought herself invisible now discovered that even the smallest voice could change the course of an empire. The world might have seen scandal, but within the mansion's quiet walls, a new truth had taken root, one that neither betrayal nor society could erase. And though challenges loomed, both knew this. Alexander Kane had returned home early, and been stunned not just by what he saw, but by who destiny had placed before him when his world was falling apart. For in Elena's strength, he had found his own redemption, and in his trust, she had found the courage to believe that even the most unlikely hearts could dance together in the same rhythm.